How long do teams typically take to close the books, and how have you seen that evolving over time?
We will see anything from it taking a full month down to teams that are sort of really buttoned up and they're trying to cut hours or minutes, during their close to get from a 5-day close to a 4-day close and maybe even to a 3-day close.
We have been talking about speed mostly, right? Like how to do it faster, how to take fewer days. Do you think that there's an inherent trade-off between speed and accuracy?
I do think there's a trade-off.
As you work with those teams and you map the processes, have you seen the answer sometimes being, you just need to stop doing this. This doesn't add value. It's not even about making it before. It's just like maybe you can skip it altogether.
How good can you just get at predicting what you think your financial statements will look like for this period? Book those and then sort of compare those against sort of when you actually wrap up all your workflows and actually finish the actuals. So I actually do think that's like a very real trade-off.
You're listening to the 10X Finance Podcast. Quick, candid conversations with the people shaping modern finance. Hosted by Albert Gozzi.
Hello everyone and welcome to the 10X Finance Podcast, when we dive into what separates good from great finance teams. I'm your host, Albert Gozzi, co-founder and CEO of Aleph, and I'm joined today by Parker Gilbert, co-founder and CEO of Numeric, an AI-powered close automation tool. Today, we'll be diving into the theme of how to close your books faster. Parker, it's great to have you. Ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it, Albert. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right, so we're going to start just to set the scene a little bit and start warm up into the theme. How long do teams typically take to close the books, and how have you seen that evolving over time?
Yeah, so I think maybe sort of helpful context from the angle that we see the most. We typically work with companies that sort of are in the kind of mid-market growth stage and maybe early enterprise today. Sort of they're kind of maybe recently public companies or things like that. And I would say we sort of think about the close as a lot of sort of like a maturity model where you sort of have you sort of are at different stages depending on sort of like, the sort of complexity and size and requirements that's, kind of being placed upon the business. So I'd say the first time we typically will work with companies is when things are starting to get complicated, right? Like the number of entities is growing, maybe the number of currencies is growing, maybe there are new product lines. Financial audits are starting to be just a sort of recurring reality, of the ongoing finance and accounting work. And there's an emphasis on faster reporting and faster numbers and utilizing the data further, right? And I think that's sort of like that intersection where you start to see the pressure and sort of like mandate that, maybe we didn't actually care too much about sort of the speed of our numbers to starting to really push on sort of the timing. And so I would say from like a pure days perspective, we will see anything from it taking a full month to close down to teams that are sort of really buttoned up and they're trying to cut hours or minutes, during their close to get from a 5-day close to a 4-day close and maybe even to a 3-day close. So we see a pretty broad range, but it and I think a lot of it is sort of trying to figure out how do we help companies sort of on that maturity cycle as the business complexity grows too.
How you're talking about maturity cycle, you're talking about things like multi-entity. So you're saying that is the thing that impacts how long it takes to close more than company scale. So it's like there seems to be some correlation between one and the other one, but it's about those things that make it complex, more about than pure size of the company or the team.
Yeah, I think so, right? Like you can see some sort of SaaS businesses where, candidly, their operations are like very, very simple, but they get to huge scale, whether that's because they've got a handful of really large contracts or lots of small ones. But typically, I think these sort of kind of close burden gets larger as data volumes go up, as the variety of tasks and workflow goes up, as just the sort of, complexity. And we even have some small companies where they're pre-revenue. Right, but the complexity is really there from day one as they, are spinning up global operations. They're, sort of hiring people around the world, and so I don't think it's sort of, perfectly correlated with sort of revenue, kind of top line revenue. It's much more about the sort of complexity of a variety of factors, right? Multi-entity currencies, products, business model, what is the sort of decisions that are being made off of those numbers. All that'll sort of impact kind of the imperative, right, of how quick do we need to close and how accurate do we need the numbers.
Makes sense. So you're talking about the best teams close the books in 4 or 5 business days, trying to shape by the day, by the hour. How has that evolved over time? I know you operate in an industry where companies have been around for tens of years trying to help people close the books faster. What have you seen the evolution be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think this sort of evolution has been one where this sort of category, this type of process, I think has largely been defined by compliance, managing audit trails, making sure that sort of sign-offs are there and present, which is an important part of what we do. And an important part of closing the books is not just being accurate and being correct, but having the right documentation and support. And then it's been a lot of management, right? It's been a lot of managing our people. It's been a lot of how do we make sure that our dozen accountants know what to do, when to do it. If I'm managing them, I know when things are late. I know where to follow up on. And so I think a lot of this sort of theme, kind of unsurprisingly, has been sort of how do we manage our humans doing this work, right? I think what we're seeing is a lot more of this work getting pushed towards, how do we, automate the underlying work? How do we do more of this work in real time and in a continuous fashion so that we can actually remove it entirely as a burden from the close process and kind of pull it forward? And then increasingly, how do we use AI in ways that can just be sort of like-for-like replacements to a lot of the workflows that people are doing, right? I mean, I think one of the really fun parts of the worst part of the close probably is like the fact that it happens every month, and from a sort of automation and AI perspective, like that's maybe the best part is like there's actually an imperative to go invest in these processes and figure out, okay, how do I take the steps that Albert goes through, to review this reconciliation every month. And how do I start to have agents and sort of tools that can actually go do more of that work for me, highlight things, and sort of manage more by exception, right? And so there's a lot of really interesting opportunities today, but I think so much of that theme is centered on replacing those human hours and getting to exception management as opposed to organization or tracking.
Perfect. So you're highlighting two that I think were very interesting, so I want to say them back to you. One is, I have 5 days, it's taking me 40 hours to close. Out of those 40 hours, what can I just not do during the close? What can I do before, during the month when I have more time? That's great. Then there's things that, still need to happen within those 40 hours. You cannot escape it because the dependencies are not there. So then It's about how you make them faster, and AI being a way of making them faster. Are there other things that you've seen, have good impact, great impact in the time that it takes for people to close?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think those are sort of like two very good themes to really focus on. I think you mentioned it as well too. I think like the way to sort of figure out kind of what bucket are these things in is it like sort of the dependencies in the workflow, just sort of mapping this out and thinking very much of this as a sort of large series of processes to be orchestrated, and that's kind of one of those first steps that's required is actually being able to say, okay, well, what can we pull forward? What can't we pull forward? And sort of that, then we can sort of identify like which bucket it needs to be in and kind of push from there.
And have you seen, as you work with those teams and you map the processes, have you seen the answer sometimes being, you just need to stop doing this. This doesn't add value. It's not even about making it before. It's just like maybe you can skip it altogether.
Maybe, like infrequently, I would say, but I do think that's like a good thing to push on. And I think I think the best teams are sort of asking this question every single month, which is, hey, as we go and finish our close process, let's retro it. Let's talk about what went well. Let's talk about what didn't go well. So I think part of that is asking the question, like, I think there's sometimes an assumption that doing things more frequently and at a higher level of granularity is better. Do we need to book our software capitalization every single month and review it with our engineering manager every month to see what projects have been disposed of or not? Like, maybe, maybe not, right? So I do think there's sort of a good sort of stress test to sort of like push on some of those assumptions, which is, are there things that we can actually, just fundamentally do less frequently or less of and still, get to the same result? But I would say typically we're seeing the other sort of side of that coin, which is, their auditors and their teams are telling them they need more. They need more granularity, they need more visibility, they need more metadata tagging. The allocations need to be more deep, right? And so we usually see this sort of other side of the curve, which is like, oh crap, like we're trying to reduce our close, yet everyone is asking us for more. This is a really sort of uncomfortable position to be in.
Makes sense. We have been talking about speed mostly, right? Like how to do it faster, how to take fewer days. Do you think that there's an inherent trade-off between speed and accuracy, or do you think that the best teams should chase both?
I do think there's a trade-off, right? I mean, I think like accruals is a good example of somewhere where I think there's like pretty clearly a trade-off. Like if we want to go just sort of book all of our sort of estimates and sort of accruals on the very first business day, we could go do that, and we could go accept a tolerance for just being less accurate in terms of like what those expense figures are, and it may or may not be a good decision based on, again, like the sort of requirements and sort of fidelity that we need to go report on. I do think that's one of those. I do think that's like an interesting AI use case. Is like how good can you just get at predicting what you think your financial statements will look like for this period, book those, and then sort of compare those against sort of when you actually wrap up all your workflows and actually finish the actuals, what those look like. So I actually do think that's like a very real trade-off. Like this sort of like kind of CEO in me wants to hammer on the notion of like, no, it's like a myth, and like more like, why don't you do it faster and do it better, and sort of like pound the table, and maybe I do that too frequently internally, but I do think in this circumstance you're talking about a real question, which is like, do I wait for more information, or do I not wait for the information and sort of make a less good estimate about some of the work we're doing.
Yeah, no, and I think in an age where everyone wants to do like things faster and more accurately, I think it is the contrarian take to say that there is some inherent trade-off and that you need to choose and that like it is important. So I think that makes sense. Maybe one more question before we get into our rapid fire wrap up that we like to do. Aleph is an FP&A tool. You work mostly with accounting teams. What have you seen works for improving collaboration between finance, FP&A teams, and accounting teams?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the almost most unnecessary sources of friction, that like oftentimes gets created in teams, right? And I think like whenever there's a handoff point, that's the place that is at most risk for sort of friction getting created, right? I would say a couple things. I think one, I think it's really important for both functions increasingly to sort of deeply understand the other's domain. The best finance people understand accounting deeply. They understand what's going on with the systems. They understand where the data is coming from, and they can help the accounting team make decisions around how to architect that system to get them the information that they need. Flip side is the exact same goes for accounting teams. They need to understand what is this data actually being used for, right? Like I think accountants can oftentimes be thinking in sort of just the framing of my GAAP financials and my audit, but that is obviously one use case amongst many that this database that they really own, is being used for. And so I think it's really important that they understand the goals. They understand sort of how does that kind of context need to get shaped and managed, and then ideally they're sort of using tools and products where they can both collaborate on, right? That they can be in each other's systems, that they aren't just sort of siloed, sort of into, the FP&A team lives over here and has this database and this set of tools, and the accounting team lives over here, and ideally there's a sort of really increased sort of level of collaboration where they are working off the same set of context.
Perfect. So I think, just say back to you, the first, empathy, understanding each other better, understanding the workflow, and understanding the pains, and then better tools. And maybe it's a good moment to give a kudos to Numeric, and we have many mutual customers that seem to be very happy. So kudos on the company that you built so far, Parker.
Thank you.
Right, maybe just to end, quick rapid fire set of questions. What's one mistake you have seen finance teams make over and over again?
Good question. I think we see I think we see a mistake, which is teams trying to be too perfect. Trying to sort of get everything right, and then not maybe sort of recognizing as much as I think they can be, which is just sort of we should be pushing on just trying to get better every month, every period, every week. In many ways, like iteration is our friend here. The operating model we need to build for the company should not be the gold-plated 500 tab model from day one. It should be probably like one sheet. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly accurate across every GL account. Probably like 8 of them need to be correct, or close to correct, right? Same things for the close. Like we don't need to go map everything perfectly detailed and perfectly nuanced in the first period. What we need to do is just make sure that we are understanding like where are we trying to get to, what are the sort of business outcomes we're trying to drive, and then how are we sort of making progress to those goals and being intentional about sort of the places we can get the most leverage. I think sometimes there is just a level of like almost sort of like feeling like everything is important and everything must be done perfectly and everything must be done all the time, and that can be like a very sort of draining and constraining sort of both feeling and function to not sort of focus on the places that truly actually have the highest leverage. And I think it's tough in operational roles like finance where there is a lot of just work that needs to get done. There is a lot of just basic requirements to keep the business sort of ticking over. So I think that's something which I certainly know in my past role, like I was on the wrong end of that spectrum a number of times and sort of had to work really hard to prioritize as effectively as like I needed to.
So maybe related, what's one piece of advice you would give to either finance and accounting leaders scaling their team?
I think this is sort of a very much sort of a numeric kind of like hiring philosophy, but I think I think it's more true than ever, which is hire for the intangibles, hire for the slope, hire for how quickly someone is going to learn, how quickly are they enjoying that process, and enjoying and getting excited by the chance to go do better work and improve things and help the business. And so I think we are sort of definitely continuing to sort of drive towards this age of generalists where the best people can be dangerous in a number of different ways. They can roll up their sleeves and get into the accounting. They can do a good enough job modeling. They can do a job sort of in the more of the biz ops side of things and getting into more product metrics and so I like that. But I think all that comes back to like you if that's going to be true, you need people who like actually enjoy the work, like they enjoy learning. They don't like feel like if you have to pull it out of folks, it's just like bleh, you need people I think who sort of have that like self-drive and excitement about getting better every day.
Makes sense. Final question: what's one trend in finance and accounting you believe will shape the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we are. I think this sort of finance. I'm curious to get your thoughts, but I feel like we are in the like first inning of sort of AI's impact, whereas in like some other fields we are deeper into the middle of the game. It's like we don't see the sort of code gen tools and the writing tools like this finance function is different. There's a lot of structured data. There's a lot of different business systems. There's a lot of there haven't been this sort of like just off the shelf magic AI experience that like transforms finance and accounting. But I think it does have a huge impact on sort of rethinking sort of how do these systems get used and utilized? How do they get architected from the ground up to use LLMs more effectively? And so I think over the coming years, we will see sort of winners who are getting a lot of the sort of core system architecture and sort of work right that is enabling them to use LLMs in novel and more effective ways. And I do think we will see, I do think sort of, teams like Numeric, like Aleph, in many ways have to be thinking about sort of a world where many of their sort of core users like are not people. They are agents. They are sort of AI tools, and I think there's a lot to figure out and a lot of green space to go sort of innovate on what can that look like and how can that enable these teams to do more with less and to do their best work.
Parker, thanks so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Albert. I appreciate it.